Everybody, the time is 6 o'clock p.m. Today is Tuesday, November 21st, 2023. I'd like to call to order the special closed session meeting for the City Council of the City of Emeryville. This meeting is being conducted in a hybrid format. Members of the public may join us by participating here at City Hall or using the link provided in the agenda for today's meeting. This time I'll ask the clerk to take the roll.
Councilmember Carr.
Present.
Councilmember Mora is absent. Councilmember Pryforce is absent. Vice Mayor Welch.
Here.
And Mayor Bowders.
Here, are there any ex parte communications to report for this meeting? Seeing and hearing none, now is the time for public comment. Member of the public wishing to comment for an item on the closed session agenda has 2 minutes to give comment. See no hands raised. There are no people present. Is there any comment received online?
No, Mayor.
Comment is closed. This time we'll adjourn. Madam Clerk, the time is still 6 o'clock. I adjourn us to closed session. We'll report out. Time is 6:34 and we're
Recording
returning.
in progress.
The time is 6:34. We're returning from the closed session. And at this time, the city council is going to recess the closed session, Madam Clerk, at 6:34, and the council will resume it at a time to be determined by the mayor. Okay.
Recording stopped.
Oh,
Recording in progress. Recording stopped.
I thought our closed session, our study session was at 6:30. Do you guys want to go do the other item for 10 minutes?
Yep, let's do it.
I don't have to announce it.
Recording in progress.
Okay, 6:35, we're gonna go back to the closed session. I've resumed from recess. 6:46, and we have returned from the closed session meeting. I'll ask if council would please report out of closed session.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. No reportable action was taken this evening.
Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. The time is 6:46. The closed session meeting is adjourned. The time is 6:46. I'd like to call to order the special study session of the City Council of the City of Emeryville for today, Tuesday, November 21st, 2023. This meeting is in a hybrid format. Members of the public may join us here at City Hall or by using the link provided for in today's agenda. Madam Clerk, would you please take the roll?
Councilmember Carr.
Present.
Councilmember Mora is absent. Councilmember Pryforce.
Here.
Vice Mayor Welch.
Here.
And Mayor Bowders.
Here. Members, at this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve the final agenda.
I'll move to approve the final agenda.
Second?
Motion by Carr, second by Welch to approve agenda. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Carr.
Aye.
Councilmember Mora is absent. Councilmember Pryforce.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Welch.
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders.
Aye. Are there any ex parte communications to report for the study session? Seeing and hearing none. Public comment for items not on the agenda. Is there a member of the public who wishes to comment for an item not on the agenda? You have 2 minutes to do so. You can approach the podium. The clerk will set the clock for 2 minutes, and when she's ready, you can give your comment. You could lift the microphone so people can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, so this is on the agenda. This is about the tree study. So I'm sorry I missed my opportunity to raise my hand. But anyways, my name is Andrea. I'm an Emeryville resident. I live at the marina, and my intention is to uplift and draw attention to the need for the trees in the marina park, and some sort of replacement plan. In reading through the tree study, I do understand that the scope of this study did not include the marina park, just to the drastic loss of trees in the storms this past season. These trees act as the marina's primary windbreak. The Emeryville Safe Harbor Marina did sustain some property damage in these last storms due to wind speeds, so definitely a priority for our community to get some sort of replanting plan in place and actionable quickly, as you know, the storms are just seeming to intensify. This also has impacted biodiversity in the park. There are several nesting bird species that no longer have access to the tree canopy that they need, owls, herons, and osprey. And then also the loss of root structure and the impact to groundwater runoff, soil retention and erosion, and the impact on public infrastructure such as like the park trails and the roads also need attention. So just really here to uplift the marina park's need for a actionable tree plan. Thank you. Oh, and this is also an opportunity for community engagement with marina residents. I'm speaking for myself as a resident and also on behalf of neighbors who have shared interest in how to cooperate or collaborate with the city in how to quickly replant and reseed trees. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of the public who wish to comment for items not on the agenda today? Okay, seeing and hearing none, we'll turn to our study session. Item 6.1 is a study session on the status of the city street tree opportunity study and report. Nancy Humphrey, good evening.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Mayor and members of council. I'm, as you know, I'm here with a representative from PlaceWorks. PlaceWorks got the contract that you guys approved last year for a street tree opportunity study. And Allison Giffen from PlaceWorks is here and will do the bulk of the presentation, and I'll come back toward the end of it. I do want to thank the member of the public who came. And we are going to bring up some of those same issues of the marina in part of our presentation.
Thank you. Welcome, Allison.
Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Giffen. As Nancy mentioned, I'm an associate at PlaceWorks, and I'd like to just describe some of the work we've been doing to identify opportunity sites in Emeryville where we can plant more street trees. Next slide, please. So we're looking where to plant new trees in Emeryville's public rights-of-way, and by rights-of-way I mean sidewalks, roadways, bike corridors, anywhere with landscaped medians or trees in the sidewalk. And we're doing so because we'd like to increase the tree canopy in Emeryville. There is a very large body of literature describing the public health benefits and other economic, socioeconomic, and aesthetic benefits that trees provide, like filtering urban pollutants out of water, out of stormwater before it gets into the storm drains, having a cooling effect, reducing the urban heat island effect or the heat intensifying effect of asphalt and concrete. So for all these reasons and more, we are hoping to identify areas in the city where we can plant more street trees and increase the urban tree canopy. So we looked at 3 different, what we're describing as opportunity sites. One of these came from an existing GIS data set that was originally put together and is continually maintained by West Coast arborists. And this data set identifies areas that street tree wells, well, it's all public trees in Emeryville, but we looked at trees that were identified, or tree wells that were identified as either vacant or containing stumps or dead trees from the most recent update of that GIS data set, which was in, I believe, May of 2022. We also looked at some other locations identified by Emeryville staff and city council. And then we looked at one more set of locations that I'll show you in a map in just a moment. And for all of these opportunity sites, we gathered information about each site and we assessed, based on a few different rankings, where in these sites we can, how we can prioritize these sites. Next slide, please. So this is it's a little bit blurry, but I think you can still get the gist of what we're showing here. The orange and brown smaller points are the tree well sites that comes from the West Coast Arborist tree well inventory. And then we have these larger blue circles with white centers. Those are the additional tree opportunity sites identified by City Council and Emeryville staff. And then we also have these brightly colored, more linear shapes that are roadway frontages of future development projects and housing element sites. In many cases, they are both currently in operation development sites or somewhere along the pipeline, and they are identified as housing element sites. And then we also have a couple public works projects. And for the last category, these development sites, a lot of them have either development plans that are under review or in process. So we decided to maintain this record of those sites, but we really focused on the first 2 types, the empty tree wells or tree well opportunity sites, as well as the additional locations identified by City Council and staff. Next slide, please. So this is just a more in-depth view of the additional opportunity sites that we evaluated. We looked at several sites along the railway corridor that runs from north to south through Emeryville, and noted 2 sites along that corridor that had some pretty suitable features, like large open soil planting, plenty of space for spread, adequate sunlight. So one of those is on Overland, I believe between 62nd and 64th Street. Another of those is at the west end of Park Avenue that abuts the railway corridor. We also looked at Hollis Street. We looked at Powell Street. There's a large open soil body there next to the bike path. We looked at several sites along 40th. 3 different sites along 40th. So those are all the additional opportunity sites that we looked at, in addition to sites that are existing tree wells. Next slide, please. Okay, so this one's very wordy, and we're actually going to get into each of these components, so I won't dwell on all the text here, but what this graphic really shows is that there are different indices that we use to rank priority. One of those indices is the equity index. So we're ranking tree well sites based on the most benefit that they will provide to the community, based on socioeconomic factors, existing shade and existing tree cover. And then we also looked at planting suitability factors. And so equity is one index. And then we have another index that looks at planting suitability factors, so characteristics of the site itself that make it more suitable to planting. And then also planting feasibility factors, which is more or less the same or similar to suitability, but it's characteristics of the site that make it less feasible to planting. So we assigned scores based on whether it was more or less feasible for planting trees. So we have the planting suitability and feasibility index. Then we have the equity priority index. Those are two separate indices, but we also combine them together just to see where there are sites that are both high equity priority and highly suitable for planting. So we looked at all three of those, the combined one and then the two components. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk about each of the factors that went into the equity priority index first. What you're seeing here is census block groups, and they are ranked with the darker pink indicating higher equity priority, so areas where we want to prioritize more trees. This comes from iTree, which is a public partnership between the U.S. Forest Service and nonprofits, and it has a publicly available ranking tool called iTree Priority, I think, and you can tell it in a list of possible factors that you would like to consider, which factors you'd like to choose, and you add weights to them, and it puts that into a composite index and scores the block groups for you within your study area of interest. So what you're seeing is the darkest pink block group on the eastern and southern part of Emeryville has the highest equity priority based on these factors. And it's a little hard to see in that box in the upper left-hand corner there, but the factors included, this is a composite score, are things like impervious surface area percentage, things like average heat index, how much hotter is that block group surface temperature compared to average for all the other block groups, and percentage of the population over 65 or under 5, which are factors that could contribute to vulnerabilities to heat, and asthma, percentage of the population with asthma, and median income. We also looked at the percentage of the population who identifies as anything other than white-only non-Hispanic, so the percentage of the population who identifies as non-white in the ACS. So those are all the factors that went into this composite score. There is one other composite score, next slide please, that we used in our equity priority index. That is the Cal EnviroScreen 4.0 score. I won't go into all of the components of the Cal EnviroScreen cumulative score because there are very many, but Cal EnviroScreen is a tool developed by the state, and it's used to map environmental justice communities for the purposes of SB 100 and other legislation. It is at the census tract level, so the geographies are a little bit larger than they were in the previous map. And it ranks census tracts in California based on their relative exposure to various environmental justice indicators like pollution burden, public health indicators, and socioeconomic outcomes. So what this is showing is the percentile scores for all census tracts in Emeryville compared to all California census tracts. So most tracts in Emeryville, based on this map, score about at the median, but a few are a little higher than the median. So those were also included in our equity priority ranking. Next slide, please. We also looked at median income because we wanted a more zeroed in factor for median income that was less generalized to the county. So this actually takes all the tracts in Emeryville, and we did a score based on whether they were 15% or more above the Emeryville citywide area median income rather than the countywide area median income. So we calculated this one ourselves. Next slide. And then we also looked at linguistic isolation. This is a component factor of Cal EnviroScreen, and what this measures is the percentage of households in a census tract within which adults report speaking English less than very well on the American Community Survey or census. So that is, I believe that is we might have one more for the equity priority index. Next slide, please. Nope, we don't. So this is all of the tree well sites taken together and scored based on all of our equity priority factors. And you can see that most of them with the highest scores are, any of them with the highest scores are usually in the block group in that south and eastern portion of Emeryville that we identified earlier in the iTree index. So that's the scoring for the highest tree well priority sites if we just look at the equity priority index. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the suitability and feasibility factors, this was easier to show in one map because the equity factors are all at the census block group or the tract level, so it's kind of hard to show them on top of each other. But for the suitability and feasibility factors, we actually used a tool called ArcGIS Field Maps, which is a mobile app that you can use on a phone or tablet. And SBCA, Steve Batchelder, California arborists, tree consultants, actually physically went around Emeryville by bike and recorded data and information about each tree well opportunity site, so on a phone or tablet. So they could record this information directly into GIS. We recorded things like how large is the tree planting site, how well do the surrounding species of plants look? Are they in good health? The other trees planted in the same planter, are they in good health? We looked at sun exposure, proximity to driveways. So those are some of the things we collected in person, which are not shown on this map. But what are shown on this map are the other suitability and feasibility factors that we were able to map in GIS. So what that's showing is proximity to benches and bus stops, which a tree well that's close to a bench or bus stop got a higher score because it's nicer to have trees near benches and bus stops. And then tree well sites that are close to underground utilities or previously identified environmental cleanup sites were assigned a lower score. Now, I should mention that this is GIS data, so in all cases, the GIS data may be, especially for underground utilities, not perfectly accurate down to like the foot or less. So in all these cases, we recommend ground penetrating radar to find the actual location of underground utilities. But these are the factors that we use to assign priority ranking in terms of suitability to each of the tree well sites. Next slide, please. So taken all together, these are the, well, not quite all together yet, but this is the highest planting suitability and feasibility sites. And you can see that this is a little more spread out. It's a little bit harder to see the lighter blue and yellow ones in this, but the darker blue ones are the highest priority sites based on planting suitability and feasibility alone. Next slide, please. So I just wanted to bring this back in one more time because I wanted to drive home that this is what I just described as basically the equity priority index first with all those maps of block groups and census tracts, and then secondarily the planting suitability and feasibility index. And those were treated separately, but we were also curious to see what it looked like to map the sites with the highest priority along both indices. Next slide, please. So this map is showing all of the sites, both the tree well sites, which are the smaller points, and then the additional opportunity sites that City Council and staff identified, which are the larger triangles. And they're all shown here ranked by cumulative suitability that looks at both priority and planting suitability. So there you can see that the sites in that census block group that are in the south and east are very high priority, but some of them are close to utilities, and that makes them lower priority, even though they have a higher equity priority. And then there's some other sites along Powell Street and elsewhere that also have a high priority. Next slide, please. And we also have a public web map. So all of this information is viewable in a public web map. That is the link at the bottom. And you can toggle layers on and off and look at various filters for, if you want to look at sites that have large planting cutouts, sites that are most feasible, you can filter for different things that you want to look at. And I'll wrap up just by saying when we're prioritizing, I really want to emphasize that this is really a time priority, and we weren't really trying to rule out any of these sites, but really it's like, which ones do we do first? So that was our goal, and I'm going to hand it off to Nancy to discuss the next steps.
Thanks. And Allison will be available for questions at the end, along with her colleague, Sarah Sutton, who has additional expertise in the trees and the planting itself. I do want to say that in the report, which is in the packet, you'll see that they go further and they recommend species and planting conditions and so forth. But so that's part of the package. All right, next slide, please. So this is where we've gotten, and we'll hear how you feel about it. But what we have now is a really good map of where we can put trees with more or less difficulty and with more or less benefit to the community. And what we're hoping to come back to council with is a proposal to go the next step and get construction drawings to allow bidding for the actual planting. Also to add the Marina Park reforestation to the scope. This was scoped before the windstorms, so we didn't have that need when we first scoped this. So this would come in a potential next step, and also construction support, so that we would have the arborist on hand for the actual planning. Next, please. So yes, about the marina. You can see on the right-hand map, the gray dots are places where there were trees prior to last winter, and those trees are gone. And these photos from a Watergate resident that were printed in the Evil Eye show just one view of how decimated it is out there. So we know that the community wants to reforest there, and staff believe that that's something we should be looking at as well. So that's part of the proposal we plan to bring. Next slide. As Allison said, the plan is, in the absence of development that's happening that gives us an opportunity that for a developer, say, to do it, we would start with, we have funding in our capital improvement plan. We would start with the highest equity priority and highest planting suitability, then go to highest equity with more difficulty in planting. And then we would, if the scope is expanded, we would then go to reforesting the marina. And then we would have this living document that we could use as we go forward with more funding, grant funding, developer engagement. And one of the things I wanted to add was we did look, didn't show up in the presentation, but it is in the report. We looked also at block faces that don't have tree wells, but that could have trees. And so we have those block faces identified on one of the maps, so that if and when there's development there, we know what would be suitable in those areas. But it's not at the point level, because we don't have tree wells there right now. So I feel like there was another point I wanted to make. I don't think so. Was that our last slide? Yeah. So yeah, as I say, Allison is available for questions. I can also answer questions, and if you've got specifics about trees, species, that sort of thing, we'll call on Sarah Sutton, who's online.
Thank you very much, Nancy and Allison. I'll call for public comment. Members of the public who haven't had a chance to comment on the study session item that would like to comment on it, we'll have 2 minutes to give comment. See no hands raised. Okay, public comment is closed, and I'll turn to members for questions or discussion. Member Pryforce.
Thank you for the presentation.
Is your mic on?
There you go. Testing 1, 2, 3. All right. So, yeah, thank you for your presentation. Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, so I've seen. I think there was one particular area near my building, the courtyards, where that side of the building is usually where because of the heat is so high, so not only the heat is high, but it's also where people tend to go to smoke, and so when the heat is that high, and it does extend from like 62nd all the way to 65th, it's pretty much it's considered a dry area, and then of course you have the train, and so because of the train, which thankfully with the quiet zone, maybe that they'll lighten up on the double paned window that they use to block out some of the noise, but that's also the thing is that it doesn't allow for it to be breathability. And so the rooms are stuffy, and the apartments there are also the BMR apartments. They place the BMRs there. And so those tends to be the apartments that are in constant rotation. There's no patio there, so they're the least desirable apartments. And I think that maybe it would be a bit more desirable if we did have trees there, so that it isn't as hot. And as someone who's grew up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, where there weren't a lot of trees. Now I'm laughing because I just remember all the tree jokes we used to use as a kid. Whenever we saw a tree, we're like, tree, right? And so one of the reasons why when I guess cities were trying to figure out where to plant trees, or yeah, and of course it was different back then than now, where there's a lot more interest in that. One of the reasons why we didn't get certain services it was because we were data dead zones, right? Most times people asked data from us, census, whatever data collection, and we didn't provide them. And I wonder whether or not the Watergate area is suffering from that kind of issue, because Watergate tends to be a data dead zone. And of course, the difference between those who own as opposed to those who rent, and whether or not those who rent feel comfortable enough to be able to answer questions and that sort of thing. And so that's something I would heavily consider, because I noticed that the Triangle neighborhood is getting a lot of support and love, because they're really good at being able to report. And so the data loves to the Triangle neighborhood, right? And so I think that that's something just to consider when evaluating, because I know that you guys are pretty much just extrapolating data from whatever data sets that they're providing you from iTree and other sort of data banks. And so that's what I want to share. I've seen it myself, how trees can pretty much just change how units are assigned in apartment buildings like my own, and to consider that perhaps the prioritization in terms of your indices may be influenced by the fact of whether or not data is actually being collected and reported in ways that truly reflect some of the demands that these communities need for those trees. So that's so much I want to share. Thanks.
Others? Member Carr.
I have a question. First of all, thank you for the tree study, and I'm really glad this is happening and that we are potentially going to move forward. And the question I have is, when this tree study was initially commissioned, it was we did not have the atmospheric river storms that wiped out the trees in the marina. Mm-hmm. But at that time, when the study was ongoing, why was it not? Why was this item not added? Why was the marina, the wiping of the marina trees not added at that time, so we could have it in time for consideration today?
It's just a question of the time things take to go to bid out for or solicit for an additional scope, and so that now is the time that we have come to that, and that's what we hope to do now. But we we didn't have scope or capacity in the contract at the time, and we would have had to come back through the administrative process. And we were working on finishing this. That's how that happened.
Thank you. Thank you,
And
Fawn.
yeah, and just that was another point I wanted to say is initially the scope cut off just sort of before Watergate, and that was because it was mostly park. The right-of-way was park after that, and just the number of trees in the park and no identified problem at that time. We wanted to be able to spend our resources on street faces where people might walk or ride bikes or otherwise engage with the streetscape.
Understood. And one of the public comment that we had earlier about this situation on the marina, I think that Emery Point did have it has had this erosion because of which it had to be shored up. That area where the trees are no longer there, that looks precarious also, and it could become the same situation if that thing doesn't happen. Also, I'm thinking, is there a reason why Emery Point doesn't have trees, or could we not plant some trees there to in order to make sure that the roots shore up the area?
I don't have any specific information on why there are no trees at Point Emery, but if you like, we can take that back to Public Works and come back.
Recognize Ryan O'Connell.
Yeah, we can certainly bring that back to like a transportation committee meeting and talk about that, and possibly even have like a little snippet of our future efforts with this study, and talk about that at Point Emery as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any comments? I do not. Just want to thank staff and thank Allison also for your work on this, everyone at PlaceWorks. This was the primary item I requested to have the city work on at January of last year, and we didn't know, what was going to happen with the windstorm and whatnot. And so we did this as a street tree item at the time. I think to the questions that Councilmember Carr asked, we haven't seen trees on Point Emery, mostly because it's very shallow landfill space, and it's not, the soil underneath it is actually there's a lot of layers of protective stuff there to keep what's there in there and not in the water, actually, because it was an artificial landmass that was built similar to the marina. And one of the challenges the trees have had is the combination of brackish water and the fact that it's essentially rotting landfill underneath it. That's one of the challenges the trees have had there, let alone the wind and other climate factors. But I support the request and recommendation of staff to expand the scope of the study to include the marina. I'm supportive of the list of priorities that were provided. I do think with the funding that was made available to do trees, that we should come back with a plan to put trees in the ground in the equity priority areas in 2024 in the community, and prioritize the places that with some additional work, like maybe hard to develop tree wells, could be the second. And I think in the meantime, do the additional scope of work to study the marina so that the marina can come up offline next. And so I know this is a study session, and we're not voting on anything, but is there consensus that the request and the recommendation from staff tonight about the next steps is something that folks are agreeable to? Yes, yes, yes.
Follow up. So the widening of the scope, are you saying would be sequential, so it would happen after this additional scope, or are you saying it will happen concurrently?
Bring it now.
Concurrently,
Okay.
Concurrent, yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you
we're-
for the clarification.
The best planting months are fall and winter, and so the goal is to get to where we're in the most planting next fall and winter that we can get going, and then be ready again for the following year and so on.
Yeah, and do the planting in phases so that we can do the ones we already know that are the highest priority, do concurrently the study of the expanded scope, so that if that was ready and we had the resources, it could be done next, but if not, it would follow in the following year's plan. Yes.
Is there a plan to engage the Watergate community in a way, like to present to them, so that they,
Yeah.
even if they know, like so that they know it's coming, right? And so
Yeah.
like they understand the process. And I think
yeah.
it would be great if they can, yeah.
They
Sorry.
can, as the public, member of the public pointed out, engage with it, be part of it. And that will be part of the plan that is developed in this scope. But I agree that it's a beloved local resource, and we can use the expertise and interest of the community. I also wanted to point out about the planting, that there will be additional maintenance required, and so we've got to figure that into the capacity to maintain the trees so they grow and thrive.
Okay, anyone else with questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much. That will bring us to an end of our study session. Madam Clerk, the time is 7:22. I conclude the study session. We will have our redevelopment agency before our council meeting. Madam Clerk, the time is 7:22. I call to order the City of Emeryville, serving as successor agency to the Emeryville Redevelopment Agency. This meeting is being conducted in a hybrid format, and members of the public are welcome to join us here at Emeryville City Hall or using the link provided for on today's agenda. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Councilmember Carr,
Present.
Councilmember Mora is absent, Councilmember Pryforce,
Here.
Vice Mayor Welch,
Here.
and Mayor Bowders.
Here. At this time, I'll entertain a motion to approve this agenda.
I move to approve this agenda.
I second.
Thank you. Motion by Carr, second by Welch to approve agenda. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Carr,
Aye.
Councilmember Mora is absent, Councilmember Pryforce,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Welch,
Aye.
and Mayor Bowders.
Aye. Are there any ex parte communications to report for this meeting?
No.
Seeing and hearing none, now is the time for public comment for consent agenda and items not on the agenda for the redevelopment agency. Is there anyone wishing to comment for the redevelopment agency meeting? No hands are raised. Comment is closed. We have 2 items on the consent calendar, members. Are there any questions or comments on the consent calendar? Seeing and hearing none, is there a motion on the calendar?
I move consent.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Welch, second by Carr to approve the consent calendar. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Carr,
Aye.
Councilmember Mora is absent, Councilmember Pryforce,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Welch,
Aye.
and Mayor Bowders.
Aye. Madam Clerk, the time is 7:23. The meeting is adjourned. Okay, the time is 7:23. I call to order the City Council of the City of Emeryville for today, Tuesday, November 21st, 2023. This meeting is being conducted in a hybrid format, and members of the public who wish to comment can join us here at City Hall or using the link provided for in today's agenda. Madam Clerk, will you please take the roll?
Councilmember Carr,
Present.
Councilmember Mora is absent, Councilmember Pryforce,
Here.
Vice Mayor Welch,
Here.
and Mayor Bowders.
Here, I'll entertain a motion to approve this agenda.
I'll move to approve this agenda.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Carr, second by Welch to approve the agenda. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Carr,
Aye.
Councilmember Mora is absent, Councilmember Pryforce,
Aye.
Vice Mayor Welch,
Aye.
and Mayor Bowders.
Aye. Item 4 is special orders of the day. We have none on the agenda for today. Item 5 is the announcement of commission and committee vacancies. Madam Clerk?
Mayor and Council, I have no report this evening.
Okay. Item
Thank
6
you.
is city council members announcing reporting on special meetings or announcements for attendance that they had. Is there anybody here who has a meeting they wish to report on? I have one, which is reporting back from the trip I was in Atlanta for the national discussion on the rail roundtable, and I had meetings with the Union Pacific Railroad. They were interesting, as well as Amtrak and the Federal Rail Administrator to talk about the city's ongoing attempts to complete its Quiet Zone project, the conversations about the federal rail safety grant, the Christie grant that the county received, and our efforts to improve rail safety here in the county, and I gave a presentation to the federal government on the same. Anyone else? Okay, the city manager's report. Mr. Jimenez?
Thank you. I just have a couple of announcements I wanted to share for the council and the community. We have the holiday parade that's scheduled for Friday, December 1st. It is a car-free event. We're asking the community to come out, roll, scoot, and stroll. It'll start at City Hall and go to Bay Street. Events will start at 4:30. The tree lighting will happen around 5:25. Parade at 5:30 will begin going down Park over to Bay Street. There will be activities at Bay Street to enjoy the open air market, Bike East Bay sponsoring a bike valet. And we also have a free e-bus shuttle from West Elm to City Hall every 20 minutes from 5:30 to 8:30. So we invite the community to come out and the council. Also, there is a pancake and pajamas at the ECCL cafeteria, which will be on Saturday, December 16th. Registration is required. There's 2 seating options, one from 8:15 to 10 a.m. and the other is from 10:30 to 12:15. Registration is open, space is limited, deadline is December 13th. So sign up. Price is $10 for residents, $15 for non-residents. Children 2 and under are free. There'll be special guests, breakfast by IHOP, gingerbread house making, and asking everyone to wear their pajamas.
Hey, that's easy.
Okay. Any questions on the city manager's report? Okay, seeing none, are there any ex parte communications that members wish to report this evening? Okay, seeing none, now is the time for public comment for the consent agenda and items not on the agenda. A member of the public wishing to give comment for an item not on tonight's agenda has 2 minutes to give comment. Anyone who wishes to give comment, if you'd line up about 3 feet behind the podium, I will just take you 2 minutes at a time. You're welcome to just get in line. And if you're joining us online and you wish to give comment online, you just need to use the raise hand feature. If you're joining us by phone, you can do that by pressing star and then 9. So we have 2 commenters. That's it. Hold on 1 second. Just make sure April's ready. Okay, go ahead. Welcome.
Good evening, Mayor, council members. My name is Sergio Jimenez. I've been a carpenter for the past 11 years. I currently work for NorCal Carpenters, Local 713, here in Alameda County. I speak on behalf of our members and the unrepresented workers who are being exploited by their employer. I'm here to ask that we use labor language that guide developers to use apprenticeships towards providing the coverage, health coverage, and for local hire policies that members of the community could benefit from. I want to speak on these 3 values and the impact they would have on the youth and the community. College might not be for everyone. It wasn't for me. This language can change. Will give our youth another pathway. Those who may not be keen on college, maybe they can't afford college. This doesn't mean that they don't deserve to make a good living. An apprenticeship will give these individuals the skills, knowledge needed to earn a good wage and benefits. This leads to people becoming good, productive members of society. I was blessed and fortunate enough to have gone through that apprenticeship, and it's changed the course of my life. Healthcare, everybody deserves good medical benefits. Having a local hiring policy will ensure that we create local jobs for our people. This leads to better community by putting that money into the hands of the people who live here and who work here. Unfortunately, those jobs get outsourced to contractors that don't use local workforce, which means that our money is being given to people from out of town. That money then leaves our community and does not get injected back into our local economy. Worst of all, people are then forced to look for work outside of our community, which means they spend more time in traffic than they do with their families. Getting home tired after the traffic rush, they don't get to enjoy our community or get involved as much as they would like to. I would like to stress the importance of implementing language like this in future projects. So before I leave, I want to ask you this. How can you serve the working class of Emeryville, the community you serve, and what can be done to keep these wages here so that the money can be put back into our local economy? Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Welcome, next speaker.
Hi, my name's Andrea Brewer. I'm a resident of Emeryville. I'm addressing council to prioritize equitable access opportunities for outdoor recreation and education in the city of Emeryville. As a coastal city with abundant connections to inland and aquatic wild spaces, there are substantial opportunities to expand intergenerational connections with nature through programming for Emeryville residents and visitors alike. There is funding available for opportunities and programs such as these that increases nature literacy and connection. And as a parent and resident of Emeryville, I am asking the city to consider opportunities such as these a priority. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Welcome, next speaker.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. My name is Navarre Oaks. I've worked in the Planning Division for over 10 years, and I am speaking before you tonight in my capacity as interim SEIU President for the Emeryville chapter of Local 1021. The City of Emeryville is incredibly fortunate to have what is frequently described as a small but mighty staff. Other words I've heard used include dedicated, nimble, and wearers of many hats, jacks of all trades. We do a lot, not just because we're experts in our fields, but because we care about our work and we care about the community that we live, work, and play in, Emeryville. We are proud of our many accomplishments, and council often verbally thanks us from the dais, but this verbal appreciation has not materialized into a negotiation process that benefits the city or SEIU. At this point, 5 months into the fiscal year, we are still without a reasonable offer from the city that, one, expediently brings all of our members up to competitive wages with other local jurisdictions, two, provides a cost of living adjustment that reflects the CPI, is comparable to the minimum wage increase set by council or equal to that of what has been given to police officers in the city, or three, provides longevity pay to incentivize the retention of employees, a functional workplace, and prevent the loss of institutional knowledge, a problem that we've been struggling with. Our membership is the most diverse, the lowest paid of any union or bargaining unit in the city. Our membership includes dispatchers and non-sworn employees in the police department, child care providers at ECDC, and members in every department and division outside of the West Wing. Compensating us is an investment in people, an investment in the city, an investment in the values the council has publicly claimed to hold dear, such as family friendliness, but has yet to address when it comes to its own house, its own pocketbook. I'd like you to see the members before here. If anyone from SEI could please stand just for a moment. Thank you so much. Our SEI membership is coming before you tonight out of frustration. It is time to take this negotiation process seriously, to get this done so we can move on and do our work on making Emeryville the best it can be. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. Good evening, next speaker.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, Council. My name is Matt Anderson. I'm SEIU 1021 shop steward for City Hall, Public Works employee for 5 years. I'm here to follow up on that and draw your attention to a serious problem that's happening in this city. And that is one of low morale and blatant lack of respect for staff in these employee negotiation processes. In my 5 years here, I have never felt as disrespected or unvalued as an employee by management as I do right now. And I'm not alone. I've spoken to multiple colleagues who are actively looking for jobs in other cities. Because your actions and the actions in these negotiations clearly indicate that we are not a valued part of this city. And I want to be crystal clear on how this impacts morale. You will be losing staff if this process continues how it has been. Lots to say there, but if I were a police officer right now, I would be getting an 8% increase in my pay. And that is absolutely not happening. One other point I want to bring up on the topic of disrespect is that of Juneteenth. June 19th, 2023 was officially proclaimed Juneteenth Freedom Day from this dais, publicly celebrated by these members, even giving thanks to the Biden administration for making it a federal holiday. And despite all of this, city council members continue to refuse to acknowledge Juneteenth as a holiday for the city of Emeryville. For my black and brown colleagues who have asked me this question, I would like to ask you, why? Why is this? For those of you who appreciate numbers, here are a few quick ones. The police union contract that was just signed cost the city an extra $37,000 per person per year. The latest proposal we got from the city was less than 1/3 of that per person per year.
Thank you for your comment.
Thank you for your time.
Good evening, next speaker.
Good evening, Mayor and Council members. I'm Amber Evans, a 13-year veteran of the city's budget cycles. As a Community and Economic Development Coordinator at the Community Development Department, and I'm SEIU 10-1 officer and here to discuss the contract negotiations. On July 1, minimum wage workers in Emeryville by council ordinance received a raise of 5.6. Current workers for the city have not received a proposal commensurate with that while we're facing historic inflation. Why does the city demand local employers to provide a standard of care that it does not provide its own? At least the employees who don't carry a gun. When the city provided police officers a cost of living, plus recruitment, retention, and longevity pay, I assumed that meant SEIU's employees covering nearly every function of the city would be equally valued staff. I've never in my 30-year career felt less value than a police officer. The city's choices have been demoralizing. The city's top 10 priorities are all implemented by staff in SEIU. A compensation study told us that our maintenance workers, dispatchers, and childcare workers are disproportionately Black members, are underpaid various competing employers. Yet despite this finding nearly a year ago, this inequity has yet to be rectified. Our public works and community development staff, such as myself, work late to seek additional funds for projects that are now 40% higher in 1 year from 2023 to 2022. Yet the very staff working to fund these contractors' higher pay has yet to receive a basic cost of living adjustment commensurate with CPI. When the master fee schedule was adopted in November of 2023, the staff report noted primarily proposed changes reflect 5.3% of CPI.
Thank you for your comment. Good evening, next speaker.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. My name is Duchess Bouzet. I am the police service manager for the police department. I have been employed with the city for over 35 years. I'm reading an abbreviated version of a letter camp sent to you all earlier today, and I'm speaking on behalf of the camp members. And I hope that you've had a chance to read the letter that was sent. Bargaining has continued for many months, and while some progress has been made, and we appreciate the work of city management, we had hoped to be closer to an agreement by now. The length and difficulty of negotiations have left many members feeling that the city does not respect them or their work, and morale is low. The main reason the city shares it cannot meet camp's most pressing concerns is because there is not enough money in the budget. As the managers who manage department and citywide budgets, we know that there is funding to meet our main goals and concerns. These main concerns include an appropriate COLA for each year of the contract that matches inflation. Anything less than inflation is a reduction in pay and raises questions on whether the city values the work of its employees. Our proposal is in line with 1, the Bay Area CPI, 2, Emeryville's own minimum wage policy, which increased by 5.6% to prevent erosion of wages due to inflation, and 3, the COLAs other Bay Area cities and counties have received. Market equity adjustment to median over 2 years. This item is distinct and separate from the COLA. Conflating the two would result in widening wage disparities over time in comparison to competitor cities who have received appropriate COLAs, making Emeryville employees' retention even more difficult. Longevity pay, identical to what sworn police officers received. Our proposal would strengthen the city's store of institutional knowledge by supporting long-term staff who otherwise may see retirement as a better financial option. It additionally would also incentivize younger staff to stay in Emeryville.
Thank you for your comment. Are there any other members of the public who wish to comment for items not on the agenda this evening? Thank you for being here, and I appreciate your solidarity with one another, and I accept your presence together as support for each other's comments this evening. There's no hands. There's one hand raised now online, Madam Clerk. Would you please recognize Brittany Hasty? Good evening. Speaker, if you're there, we can't hear you. Speaker, if you have a microphone plugged into your device, you might want to take that out, and sometimes that affects it. Okay, you're off mute right now. Okay, now you're just going on and off mute. Speaker, if you'd like to submit a written comment, you can do that by sending it to the clerk, and it will be shared with the council. Are there any other members of the public who wish to give comment? Seeing none, public comment is closed. We'll turn to item 10, which is the consent calendar. Members, are there any items on the consent calendar for which you wish to discuss further or ask questions about? You have an item on the consent calendar, yes?
No.
Well, this is a consent calendar, so we're not taking speeches. Is there any other member who wishes to discuss the consent calendar item? No? Is there a motion on the consent calendar?
I move approval of the consent calendar.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Welch and second by Carr to approve the consent calendar. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Carr.
Aye.
Councilmember Mora is absent. Councilmember Pryforce.
Here, not giving any speeches.
Vice Mayor Welch.
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders.
Aye. Consent calendar is approved. We'll turn to item 11.1, which is an introduction and first reading of an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville approving an amendment to the conditions of approval for the Promenade Center Retail Mixed Use Project Preliminary Development Plan to include commercial recreation. Is there any member of council who wishes to receive the full presentation for this item? Is there by unanimous consent agreement to waive the presentation? Okay, presentation is waived. This is a public hearing. A member of the public who wishes to comment on item 11.1 at public hearing will have 2 minutes to do so. Madam Clerk, the time is 7:41. I've opened the public hearing for item 11.1. Is there anyone here to comment on the public hearing? Madam Clerk, seeing no hands, the time is 7:41. The public hearing is now closed, and we'll bring it back for discussion. Is there any member who wishes to discuss? If not, I'll entertain a motion. You have your hand up?
To discuss what?
This is to discuss approval of the Promenade Recreational Indoor Sports Complex.
No.
Okay? So if not, I'll entertain a motion to read by title only. Is that required for this item?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, is there a motion?
Yeah, I'll make the motion to read by title only.
Second?
Thank you. Motion by Carr, second by Welch to read by title only the ordinance. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Carr?
Aye.
Councilmember Mora is absent. Councilmember Pryforce?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Welch?
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders.
Aye, having been approved, Madam City Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville approving an amendment to the preliminary development plan and conditions of approval for the Promenade Center Retail Mixed-Use Project to include commercial recreation and indoor sports and recreation as a permitted use and to remove language restricting the hours of operation to 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. The CEQA determination on this item was already completed with a mitigated negative declaration for that project.
Okay, thank you. The title having been read, is there any discussion on the ordinance? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve the ordinance.
I move approval of the ordinance.
Second.
Thank you. Motion by Welch, second by Carr to approve the ordinance. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Carr?
Aye.
Councilmember Mora is absent. Councilmember Pryforce?
Pryforce here without any speeches.
Vice Mayor Welch?
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders.
Aye. Do you wish to vote on the item or not? That's an abstention from Councilmember Pryforce. Okay, we'll move to item 11.2, which is objective development standards.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Council. I'm here before you to introduce Jean Iceberg, who will be presenting remotely on the objective design standards, which I should be able to say clearly by now. And I will be available at the end of the presentation for any questions you may have. And very happy to be before you tonight. It's a long work in progress, and looking forward to see where we're going to go this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Jean.
Hi. Good evening, Mayor Bowders and members of the council. Again, I'm Jean Iceberg with Lexington Planning. We should also have Jane Lynn from Urban Field Studio on the line, who is available during our Q&A.
Thank you.
So we're back tonight for an action item on the Objective Design Standards and Design Guidelines project. Next slide, please. I'm going to recap the purpose of the project, an overview of the project, the applicability within Emeryville, and then we'll focus on the revisions since the council's review in July. And so that's both for the design guidelines and Title IX, the planning regulations. Next slide, please. And so the purpose of the project is to create objective standards. This helps ensure that the city can continue to enforce its regulations, enforce its design priorities for high quality housing, for streetscape and other public improvements, even with streamlined review. And so the project aims to clarify standards, simplify regulations, the process requirements for both city staff and decision makers, as well as for applicants and other community members. And this helps the city comply with recent state legislation, which relies more and more on objective standards when cities' review is only allowed based on objective standards for certain types of projects that are undergoing streamlined review. Next slide, please. And so the way it is now, the city has design guidelines. These are subjective criteria, but it also has design standards, which are objective requirements. The objective standards define a threshold or criteria. These are typically measurable or very clear in terms of having no subjective criteria. And so when we look at these standards, in general, they fall into two buckets. One relates to site design, and so that's the relationship between the building and the street or the streetscape. And then the building design itself, including its form, its facade, massing, articulation, as well as building materials. Next slide, please. The Planning Commission last month recommended that the City Council adopt amendments to the design guidelines in Title IX, the planning regulations, with 2 modifications. Those have been incorporated into the draft ordinance before you tonight. Next slide, please. So first, the design guidelines. These were originally adopted in 2010 after the general plan update. And so the changes here, overall, you'll see a reduction in the number of pages in the guidelines. We've removed guidelines that have either been completed or are redundant, overall streamlining of the content. Objective standards were moved from the design guidelines into the planning regulations so that you have that distinction between the 2 types of documents. In general, the applicability is still the same. The design guidelines apply to all discretionary projects, both citywide as well as based on use. So there are design guidelines for residential uses, commercial uses, as well as different contexts, such as the eastern neighborhoods versus Bay Street and other regional retail areas. You'll also see a change, which is the previous guidelines or the current guidelines show examples of both successful or desirable versus undesirable outcomes. Now, since the guidelines have been adopted and in use the last dozen years, now you see more and more examples from within Emeryville, and so you just see those successful design examples shown in the document today. Next slide, please. So since the council's review in June and July, we've made changes based on the feedback from the commission and the council, and so again, you'll see some further streamlining. You'll see revisions to graphics, additional photo examples, updates to maps, and these, you also see that in updates to the matrix of specific changes, which is in the spreadsheet, also included in your packet. Next slide, please. So the second piece is the planning regulation amendments. This is essentially the list of topics that are addressed in the objective standards. And so it's less about building articulation or building design standards and a lot more about amenities within a building, the relationship to the public realm, to public parks, to public improvements. Next slide, please. In terms of applicability, again, these standards will apply to all residential projects, including residential mixed-use projects, but there are certain types of projects that are reviewed solely on the basis of these objective standards. Those subjective criteria cannot be used to evaluate the project in terms of approving it or disapproving it. And so you may be familiar with some of these. This includes Senate Bill 35, which is streamlining typically for affordable housing, Assembly Bill 2162, which is specific around supportive housing, and then Housing Accountability Act projects, which include projects with at least 2/3 residential uses. Some of the standards have applicability only to projects with 10 or more units. So for example, some of the residential amenity requirements. And this is simply because those projects have a little bit more economies of scale that they can include those types of amenities or additional regulations. And then lastly, some standards apply to commercial projects, to industrial projects, for example, the public park requirements. Next slide, please. So some key changes since the council's review in July, some minor modifications to the building design section, including updates to the graphics in the family-friendly section, some modifications to the bonus criteria, the addition of some requirements for double-pane windows. You'll see attached in your packet a handout on the discards or refuse collection plan. So you may recall there's a couple handouts referenced in the ordinance for topics that change from time to time, like refuse collection requirements. So you'll see that example handout there. Second, residential amenity requirements were updated. Next slide, please. And then some changes to the public improvements, including streets where no new curb cuts are permitted, as well as refinements to the transportation demand management measure requirements. Next slide, please. So additional key changes were to the demolition ordinance. And this is somewhat distinct from the design standards that I was just describing, but some of these changes do include updates to add objectivity. So first key change is to reorganize this section. And so it distinguishes between regulations applicable to significant structures versus demolition of residential units, which are not necessarily historic. Clarifies a process for preservation permits for demolition as opposed to a conditional use permit. Adds a requirement requiring evidence that it's more expensive to rehabilitate than it is to rebuild. A process for reuse and demolition for public safety specifically, which could be approved by the community development director. Also includes a reference to what we think of as Senate Bill 330, which is Government Code Section 66300, which addresses protected units, the replacement requirements when you have protected units, namely units that are occupied by lower income households. And then additionally, a requirement to replace not just lower income housing, but naturally occurring affordable housing. So that could be based on the age of a structure. Housing that just is affordable at below market rate rents. And so it requires that demolition of those types of units would also need to be replaced at below market rents. And then you should have in your packet a supplementary memo, which makes a modification to this section regarding compliance with the existing residential landlord and tenant relations regulations. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Before we take questions and comments from members of the council, we'll turn to the public. This is a public hearing. Madam Clerk, the time is 7:53. I'm opening the public hearing. A member of the public who wishes to comment for the ordinance or resolution itemized under 11.2 will have 2 minutes to give comment. Is there anyone present here who wishes to give comment on this item at hearing? And I see no hands raised online. Did we receive written comments for this hearing?
No, Mayor.
Okay, Madam Clerk, the time is still 7:53, and I've closed the public hearing, and I'll turn to members for questions or discussion. I have 2 items I spoke with staff about in advance of this meeting that I thought might be worth discussing just briefly. First, I want to just thank everybody, Navarre, Jean, Jane, everyone on the team who, this is a substantial undertaking, and especially the legal department for doing all the red line. To bring this into fruition. This was a mandate from the state to essentially create objective standards for all development, to eliminate subjective ways in which development could be thwarted. It's not really the problem in our city, but other cities were having issues with this, and so all of us had to take the medicine at the same time. And I think that the work that was done was comprehensive. It gave us a chance to actually improve the way we do urban design and add clarity to what we do. So I think it's a really productive and helpful thing. The 2 small changes I would like to propose are, well, one is the substantial, I suppose. The small change is that in section 9-5.2004, subparagraph C, subparagraph 4, there's a definition. We have to have dimensions now for things, and there's dimensions proposed by staff for linen closets and pantries, and they're listed as 2 feet by 2 feet minimum. And just based on an analysis of that, I'd like to propose that they be minimum of 3 feet wide, 2 feet deep, and 8 feet high at a minimum. Just because you could get somebody who would build a linen closet that actually is a cupboard, or a pantry that's under a counter, in theory, because there's no height dimension. And I thought 2 by 2 was a little small for people who have families to put actual folded blankets and things in, towels. So I'm going to propose that small amendment tonight to that for linen closets and pantries. And the second item I had was in the table in 9-4.204E. That has the ways in which you can get the bonus points, and we have the housing department and Valerie Bernardo through the housing element proposed ways in which we would develop parking structures, residential parking structures, in a way so that they're built in a manner that could be future conversion to housing. And I think that that's a good thing. It's fulfilling part of our housing element goals. But it was proposed that we would give 10 points for every 1% of construction value. And I think that might be a little high. And I want to propose amending it to 5 points for every 1% of construction value, so that there's a little more at stake and we don't have community benefits completely linked to parking structures. Those are my comments, but otherwise just grateful that this final product is here and happy to hear others. Okay, I'm going to make a motion to, Madam City Attorney, because you have 2 items here, do you need a motion to read by title only, a motion for the ordinance, and then a motion also for the design guidelines?
That's correct. They're separate items. Thank you.
Okay, and then for the 2 items I have, would you like them in the ordinance or in the guidelines?
Believe those are both in the ordinance. Let me confirm.
Okay. You may ask a question, sure.
That closet space, how did that measurement come about, if someone can help me? Because does that compromise space from elsewhere?
Let Navarre answer the question. Is it giving up space elsewhere in the unit? And how did you come up with it, the one you had?
We were trying not to, we wanted to provide space without being overly abundant or onerous in the requirements. However, I don't think a 1-foot change in width would do that, and it would, of course, be more functional. So I don't see it as being a detriment in any way. Yeah.
City Attorney?
They're both in the ordinance.
Both in the ordinance?
Yes.
Okay, I'm going to make a motion to read the ordinance in item 11.2.1 by title only.
I'll second.
Thank you. Motion by Bowder, second by Carr to read by title only. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Carr?
Aye.
Councilmember Mora is absent. Councilmember Pryforce?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Welch?
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders?
Aye, Madam City Attorney.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Emeryville amending the planning regulations in Title IX of the Emeryville Municipal Code to streamline the development review process for multifamily and mixed-use residential projects, requiring ministerial approval to comply with state law.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to make a motion to approve the ordinance with 2 amendments, amending Table 9-4.204, subparagraph E, to change 10 points for every 1% of construction value to 5 points for every 1% of construction value, and to likewise amend 9-5.2004, subparagraph C, subparagraph 4, to add as the dimensions minimum for linen closets and pantries a width of 3 feet, a depth of 2 feet, and a height minimum of 8 feet. That's my motion.
I'll second.
Thank you. Motion by Bowder, second by Carr as amended. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Carr?
Aye.
Councilmember Mora is absent. Councilmember Pryforce?
Pryforce here without any speeches.
Vice Mayor Welch?
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders?
Aye.
Can I clarify, Councilmember Pryforce, are you voting aye or nay on that item?
Pryforce here without any speeches.
Okay, without a vote of aye or nay on the record, your vote is going to be counted as an abstention.
As it has been for all items tonight.
Pryforce here without any speeches.
We understand. We can understand what you're doing. It's not really relevant or helpful, but that's your way.
Pryforce here without any speeches.
You're out of order now. I'll make a motion to approve item 11.2.2's resolution.
I will second.
Thank you. Motion by Bowders and a second by Welch to approve item 11.2.2's resolution. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Carr?
Aye.
Councilmember Mora is absent. Councilmember Pryforce?
Pryforce here without any speeches.
Vice Mayor Welch?
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders?
Aye, that's approved. Okay, we'll move to item 12, which is 12.1 is a presentation from the Alameda County Transit Realigned Bus Service Network Plan Update. Welcome to our friends from AC Transit.
Hi, good evening. My name is Stephen Jones, External Affairs Representative with AC Transit. I'm joined tonight by my colleague and Senior Transit Planner, Carissa Lee, and we appreciate this opportunity to update you on Realign, AC Transit's update to its transit network in the wake of the pandemic. Tonight, we'll be sharing a brief update on that effort and how the community can help provide feedback on these proposals. And I just want to stress at the outset that gathering community input is essential to creating a system that's both equitable and meets the needs of transit riders. So I encourage you to help us share Realign information far and wide so that Emeryville residents get the transit service that they need. If we could go to the next slide, please. Super. Just very briefly, the Alameda Contra Costa Transit District, AC Transit, is the largest bus-only public transit system in California, and we're the third largest bus-only public transit agency in the United States. We serve 1.5 million people across 13 cities and 8 unincorporated areas in western Alameda and Contra Costa counties, from El Sobrante in the north to the Alameda-Santa Clara County line in the south. More than 140,000 riders per day on average rely on AC Transit to get them where they need to go. 65% of our riders are low income, 75% are people of color. And over 40% of our riders do not have access to a working vehicle. We're also the East Bay school bus, making 30,000 trips to and from home to school and back every school day. Next slide. So this map just shows a high level, it shows our network of lines that operate in the Emeryville area. The lines in red show our most frequent service, running 20 minutes or better along San Pablo, 40th Street, and Shellmound. Routes shown in blue run every 30 to 60 minutes. And finally, routes in gray are those that vary in frequency. So this includes our Transbay services, our early bird service, or our late night service. Next slide, please. So before we take a look at some of the possible changes to service in Emeryville, I just wanted to give you a bit more insight into what Realign is and why we're doing it. It's AC Transit's top-to-bottom analysis and update of our entire service network in the wake of the pandemic. We're reviewing where our routes go, how often our buses are running, and what days of the week and when in the day they're operating. Next slide. We're doing this work because, as I said, the pandemic dramatically shifted how our riders use our system to get around. Our ridership is now at 72% of what it was before the pandemic, and it continues to grow. Much of that recovery has happened on major routes and outside of traditional work hours. So the way our system is currently designed too often does not meet or match riders' new needs. And at the same time, we're challenged by a shortage of bus operators and the funding needed to sustain our service. So we really need to take a closer look at what we're doing. Next slide, please. So the Realign project will ultimately culminate in a new bus network in August 2024, and that's signified by phase 5 there. Earlier this year, in phase 1, we surveyed more than 15,000 people to learn how they currently use our service and what they'd like to see moving forward. In phase 2, we took that feedback and identified 3 core principles to guide our work. Carissa will talk a little bit more about that. But with these principles as our guide and community feedback, we drafted new service network proposals. And so now in phase 3, we're asking for the public to tell us what they think of the proposed changes and if we're on the right track. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Carissa to walk us through the details.
Thank you, Stephen. Next slide, please. So a little bit about the demand trends that we've been seeing throughout our service area. We've seen significant ridership recovery. We're about 75% recovered from our pre-pandemic ridership. But the demand patterns have changed. So we are seeing a drop in ridership to major downtown areas, and ridership is up in communities where they tend to be lower income. And so again, our ridership, what we're seeing is that the ridership is more diffuse, and people are using the system outside of the traditional commute times. Next slide. So that was demand trends. That's that's being used to inform some of the proposals that I'll be speaking about. Additionally, these guiding principles have also informed these proposals. So these were approved by our board in September, and they were refined based on what we heard from the community across 47 events, 914 touch points, and 1 trilingual digital workshop. So those 3 guiding principles are equity, reliability, and frequency. Equity is to provide the greatest level of service where concentrations of greatest mobility need exist. Reliability is, the bus is going to show up when it says it does, and then frequency is how often the bus comes, and making sure that our network is reflecting the highest frequency where the greatest demand exists. And so again, these are all working together. Next slide. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the 3 different scenarios we developed. The first 2 scenarios, the balanced coverage scenario and the frequent service scenario, are cost-neutral scenarios, meaning we're using the resources that we have in a different way under these proposals. And the third is an unconstrained plan. That plan illustrates our vision if we had additional resources in terms of buses, operators, funding, garages, the whole thing. Next slide, please. So diving into the balanced coverage scenario, this scenario, it's seeking to keep coverage everywhere in the service area as it exists today, but expanding it in a few places. It's putting forth a number of new realignments on the street to improve reliability and access to layovers and restrooms for our bus operators. And then finally, it's also increasing frequency on lines where ridership is the highest. Next slide. The frequent service scenario. So this scenario, really the goal of this one is to provide fast and frequent, a fast and frequent network with no lines running less than every 30 minutes. This also includes improvements to the frequency of trunk lines, and many of these routing recommendations in the frequency scenario overlap with the balanced coverage scenario. Next slide. And then finally, we have the unconstrained vision scenario. So this scenario is a little bit of more of everything everywhere. It's restoring nearly all the service suspended during the pandemic. It makes significant increases to frequency across the board on existing lines. It proposes new lines and services to communities that lacked it even before the pandemic. It includes 3 flexible service zones. And again, this is a vision. We don't necessarily have the operators or the buses or the funding, but it is a tool for us to advocate for those resources in the future. Next slide. Okay, great. So now I'm going to jump into some of the key highlights for bus routes that go through and around Emeryville. And again, this is going to be a big, broad overview, but there's a lot more on our website at actransit.org/realign. Next slide. So this is the line 72, 72M, and 72R. These routes currently run along San Pablo Avenue from downtown Oakland to the city of San Pablo. And what are the changes? So one of the key things that we have heard is that having 3 separate lines on this corridor can be a bit confusing because these routes end up in different places. And so in response, we are proposing to have 2 routes, the 72 and 72M. And this means that the 72R under this proposal would be discontinued, and those resources would be combined into the 72 and 72M. 72 and 72M, they'll come every 15 minutes for a combined frequency of 7.5 minutes, instead of every 30 minutes, which is what they currently do right now. And this will be at every stop, as opposed to today where only the rapid stops get the higher frequency. And we're also going to be looking at spacing bus stops out more so that buses can come reliably, they can come on time while still being within walking distance for the neighborhood. So again, we are also want to note that we're planning this with the ACTC San Pablo Avenue Corridor project, which is happening now. We're planning this with that project in mind. And yeah, again, we're aware that we want to make this proposal. We want to hear from you all, but we also want to make sure this proposal is justifying the improvements through the ACTC project. Next slide. This is line 7 and F. Line 7 currently operates every 30 minutes, serving Arlington, North Shattuck, Emeryville, Amtrak via Ashby Avenue. We are proposing serving Emeryville Amtrak via Stanford. Line F also runs along much of this routing for every 30 minutes. And so there would be a combined frequency of 15 minutes service. You can see on the map where the orange line and the blue line overlap. That is where the 15-minute frequencies would be. And you know, we have heard from the community and we have heard from electeds that this frequency is insufficient, and we want to make sure that we're keeping in mind the Powell, the investments that are being made along Powell to you know, expedite Transway buses onto the freeway as well. So we're noting that in our feedback. Next slide, please. Line 27 and 36. The new line 27 replaces the current line 79 service along Colusa Avenue. Line 27 is proposed to run every 30 minutes from El Cerrito Plaza BART station to downtown Berkeley, Ashby Avenue, all the way to Emeryville Amtrak. And so that route would be taking over the Ashby section from the current line 7. So we're still serving Ashby. In addition, line 36 would be extended to cover the southern portion of the current line 79. And so this adds a new connection to the Emeryville Amtrak and allows for a better crosstown service from Emeryville to Berkeley and North Oakland. However, we have heard, you know, questions about feedback on the line 29 connecting West Oakland to Emeryville Amtrak. So again, that's something that we are hearing from the community, we're hearing from electeds, and we want to note that tonight. Next slide. Line 29. This line currently serves Lake Merritt, downtown Oakland, West Oakland, and Emeryville every 20 minutes. We are proposing to reduce its frequency to every 30 minutes and use those resources to extend the route to Alcatraz to provide new service where we currently don't have service. So this will fill in a crosstown gap in this part of the service area. Next slide. So this table is just showing some of the frequency changes for each scenario. And really, I just want to emphasize here that in all the scenarios, there are lines operating, there are more lines operating every 10 minutes than in our existing scenario. You know, the balanced coverage scenario has one fewer line coming every 10 to 15 minutes, and the frequency scenario has no lines operating worse than every 30 minutes. But again, this is just a quick summary of some of the frequency changes and an overall broad overview of some of the changes that we're making to the routes. So I will hand it back over to my colleague, Stephen.
Thanks, Chris. So next slide, please. Just as I mentioned earlier, community feedback is essential to creating a system that works for people, and we're encouraging everyone to review the proposals and provide comments by December 13th. As we said already, more information is available on our website at actransit.org/realign. I've also left some materials at the front desk, so it's printed out and available for folks there. And I just want to flag that there's two meetings, December 7th and also on December 13th, opportunities for the public to, again, provide feedback on these proposals. The next slide, please. It just shows the many different ways in which we're engaging the community and our riders and asking for their feedback. And the next slide just simply shows the many ways in which we're promoting this project, again, in multiple languages. And just really the takeaway here is we're doing a full court press to do a deep dive into the community and really make sure that we're engaging as many people as we can in this process. I'll mention here once again the interactive map on our website and see that for more details and to provide feedback online. And then the last slide here, I'll just leave with you the contact information not only for Carissa, but also External Affairs Representative Ryan Lau. I'm here tonight in his stead. They're both available to assist you as this process moves forward. So thanks so much for your time, and we're happy to take any questions or comments.
Thank you. We'll take public comment first. Members of the public who wish to comment on item 12.1 related to the realign proposal at AC Transit will have 2 minutes to give comment. Yeah, if you could step aside so my public commenter could use the microphone, please. Good evening.
Hi, thank you. My name's Andrea. I'm an Emeryville resident and a frequenter of the Line 29 and the F, as well as the 36. The 29 for communities in Oakland and an aspect of Emeryville that connects Mandela Parkway to West Oakland Station. That is the only bus that runs reliably, and shortening it or lengthening the duration between each bus, it's always lame to have to sit and wait for a bus. I'm just going to put that out there. And then the Line F, an issue that I've seen within Emeryville Transit, the Emery-go-round, and like correlating or matching up with Line F, is that especially in those like out of commute hours, there's often like just a mismatch in when the Emery-go-round is dropping you off or making it to the marina and to the F station, and then the next F bus, to the point where like sometimes on an off day you're at the bus stop for 45 minutes waiting for a connection. So since you're here and taking a comment, you know, it's just maybe there could be more linkage between the system that runs Emery-go-round and AC Transit, just to make sure that Transbay connection is like truly efficient, because it's a really economical way to get to the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who would like to comment on 12.1? See no hands raised. Comment is closed. Are there questions that members have or comments on while AC Transit is here for the realign program? Anyone? Vice Mayor?
I just had one question about the R. Have you received any feedback or concern about canceling it or merging it together? My concern is, as someone who used to take the R from several different locations, one of the benefits was that it had less frequent stops. So I understand that the combination will add more frequency to the 72 and the 72M, making it, you said that was 7.5 minutes frequency, but then there's still these stops. The R has significantly less stops. So, but you're not changing the stop frequency, you're just increasing the time frequency in which it comes. Have you received any feedback about the R and the number of stops that it only, what I want to say is the number of stops it services?
Yes, I think you hit the trade-offs right on the head. Like yeah, so yes, we have received quite a bit of feedback and concern about discontinuing the R, and you know, spacing the buses under this proposal would come every 7.5 minutes, like you said, but that also means that, you know, we might have some stops change and respace, and so we have heard some concerns about that. Yeah.
But it sounds like the trade-off is then the frequency makes up for the amount of time you would then be stopped. If you wanted to take a faster route, you would take the M. And then because there's going to be a higher frequency, meaning there's going to be less people waiting at certain stops, that means the driver can then, people can board on and then you can go off faster. It sounds like there's a balance there. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the idea is that we are wanting the buses to show up reliably when it's scheduled to show up. And so what we're seeing a lot on the corridor is that buses are bunching. So, you know, it's when you have a bus coming and then there's one right behind it. And
right.
Then you end up having to wait even longer for your next bus. And so this proposal is trying to create more a bus that will show up more dependably. But that said, the trade-off is that we would be discontinuing the 72R, and the stop spacings may change a little bit as a result.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But just to reiterate something you said, and I know you talked about more at Transportation Committee, you're proposing to do fewer stops than the 72 and the 72M have today, but more stops than there are. You're trying to like actually strike a median number of stops is what we heard. Is that correct?
Yeah, we would try to strike that balance, and of course, we would work with the city on what that would look like.
Okay. Did you have other questions?
No.
Others who have questions? Member Pryforce.
So as someone who's one of those zero vehicle households, then taking the bus is something that's very important to me, and it's vital to how I get around in addition to a bike. I do have a pet peeve about the bike, but I'll mention that later. But one of the things about when you talked about walking distance, someone who uses a walking stick, sometimes that experience for those who are differently abled is a bit more difficult. And of course, as your studies have shown, that with an increase of population in terms of aging, that with the increase in aging population, that infrequent stops. I'm just hoping that you all are able to consider their experience, because they also tend to not be the ones who, depending on how you collect data, may not be as represented in terms of sharing their opinions, in terms of their experience. And so I think that's just something to consider, is not just equitable practices, but how equitably you collect data that informs equitable practices. And so, and then when it comes to like my pet peeve is just that the bike stands tend to not be as accommodating to e-bikes as they are to regular bikes or non-e-bikes. Yeah, I remember having to, for my daughter, I had to, I needed my bike, but she was nervous about going to school because of bullying, and so she had to get on the bus. And we tried to place my bike on the bus, but we couldn't, and so I ended up having to pedal behind her the entire way. And so, I mean, she appreciated it, but it was killer on my thighs. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment. I appreciate those comments and that perspective. Just want to let you know that we're working with groups like the Community Resources for Independent Living. We're working with the United Seniors of Oakland and Alameda County, right, to make sure that we're working with them to get feedback from those communities to get the direction that we need to make responsible recommendations on how we design our service. So just wanted to share that with you, and again, thank you for those comments.
Others? You have another comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, I would also recommend Greenlighting Institute and Policy Link. And so they're some of the most respected when it comes to being able to provide what the experience of especially those who are low opportunity, and when that relates to income, race, background, language, those sort of things. So I would recommend contacting them.
I'll just raise my two primary points at Transportation Committee. I want to thank you, Carissa, for being back here again in such a short window of time. And Stephen, I don't know what Ryan did to put you on the hook this evening, but thanks for joining us. My first is on the 29 route. Somebody who wrote it today coming back from the airport from West Oakland BART. I think that one of the things that's a missed opportunity in the current route plan is that it goes down Hollis Street, but it doesn't actually touch the Amtrak station. And when we talk about, there was a commenter who talked about, syncing up with other services and systems, it also feels like a missed opportunity to not have it sync with national and regional rail, commuter rail and passenger rail. And so just looking at that route, it could just make a small turn on 59th Street and go a block and a half into the train station, similar to how it goes around the West Oakland BART station on its way from Oakland. So I hope you'll examine that as a possibility. And then my other comment is just that the city is working very closely with the county on San Pablo Avenue, but also on our own program, 40th Street. We have, received county funding, and we've applied for Reconnecting Communities grant funding. And I just really want to highlight that with the transit dedicated lanes we have there, I really hope AC Transit will think very carefully about the frequency of Transbay bus service. That includes also local services like the 36 and the 57 that service 40th and Shellmound streets. One of the things that we could unwittingly put at risk is there's a need for transit dedicated spaces. It reduces headways, it increases ridership, frequency, and reliability, all the things that I know you're trying to optimize with this project. But if it feels kind of weird, like a very, maybe to me it feels a little out of sequence, and I know it's not about our city alone, but it feels a little out of sequence, the timing of this realign plan, to make a lot of changes as we're about to invest a lot of money in infrastructure. And I would really hate to see people say transit lanes are bad because there's no buses here. I just really ask that you think about that very carefully and talk to your board about that. So those are my comments. Okay. Thank you so much for being here this evening and for listening to us and all the work I know you're doing at agencies around the region as you bring this back to your board in December, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you have anything final for us before we let you go? I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Thank you for all your work. All right. Okay, we'll turn to item 12.2, which is our last action item, which is the 2024 state and federal legislative agenda and our summary of the 2023 successes. And Nicolo DeLuca from Townsend Public Affairs is here.
Honorable Mayor, Madam Vice Mayor, and council members, Nicolo DeLuca, Townsend Public Affairs. Suddenly I felt like a lot of pressure being the last item before Thanksgiving break. So we are before you this evening, when I say we, because I've got a team with me, to have the discussion and then ideally the adoption of the 24 state and federal legislative platform for this city. In kind of layman's terms, the adopted ledge platform is really our playbook for the upcoming year in both Sacramento and Washington, D.C. We like to be nimble and flexible, so sometimes some items will stay on the list, other times items will be removed. So very briefly, the goal is to adopt this, and then it really puts us, it gives us our marching orders and our instructions for the upcoming year. We broke down the proposal based on policy topics. So the first one you'll see on page 2 is about homelessness and behavioral health. Second one is about housing and greater access. And then you see on page 3, the next topic is economic development and transportation and infrastructure, public safety, climate resiliency, and then miscellaneous, which is a helpful catch-all. And then as you'll see in each box, we talk about policy priorities and then also funding priorities. The reason why we talk about funding priorities is because over the past few years, we've been very successful submitting state district spending requests, also known as earmarks, and then federal district spending requests, also known as earmarks. We've got a great delegation in DC and in Sacramento. They've been really good to the city. And then kind of jumping to 23 wins, really, really proud of, and Mayor, great work getting some of that state funding for 40th Street. Then we've got the pending earmark from Congresswoman Lee also for funding for 40th Street. So with that said, I will stop speaking and happy to take any comments. And then once adopted, like I said, these are our marching orders, and then happy to come before you all whenever you all would like on updates, discussions on some of our priority projects and next steps. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. First, we'll take public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to give comment on the 2024 state and federal legislative agenda and priorities? I didn't see anyone with a hand raised on Zoom. Public comment is closed. Members, are there any questions or comments for Nicolo about the legislative platform or agenda? Seeing none. Okay, I have some very brief comments, which is thank you as always to Townsend Public Affairs for the excellent advocacy work you do on behalf of the city of Emeryville. Very instrumental in helping the city secure both federal earmarks as well as state grants over the years that have helped us complete projects that we do here in the city, especially the last couple years with the cleanup at the Christie sites, funding from Barbara Lee. We've had funding for 40th Street as well. And so just really grateful to you. This is a really good platform and policy. I really support all the things in here related to homelessness and environmental justice and social justice issues. I think we've really got a platform that reflects the city's values. It's one that we've vetted repeatedly and built on over the years, and with it we can rely on that as we move forward. And Townsend can then flag for us legislation as it comes out in the coming year, things that are of importance to us, they'll bring back to us for discussion. So if there's no comment, I'll make a motion to approve the legislative agenda and platform for the city for 2024.
I second.
Okay. Madam Clerk, there's a motion by Bowders and a second by Welch to approve. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Carr.
Aye.
Councilmember Mora is absent. Councilmember Pryforce.
Pryforce here without any speeches.
Vice Mayor Welch.
Aye.
And Mayor Bowders.
Aye. Thank you. That's been approved. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That was easy. Happy Thanksgiving.
Happy
Appreciate
Thanksgiving, sir, and have a safe ride home.
Will do. Thank you.
Be good to tell Santino to be good because Santa's watching. Yeah, that's the best threat. Okay, we'll turn to item 13, which is department head reports. Do we have any this evening, Pedro? No? Okay, there are no department head reports. Future agenda items. Member Carr? Member Welch? Member Pryforce?
So I spoke to one of the owners managers of the bank club, and unfortunately they had an incident where they were robbed, I believe twice in a very short amount of period of time, definitely within a week, and so they had to they had to come up with the money to address the issue. And so I'd like to place on the future agenda item, we talked about minority and minority serving businesses, BIPOC businesses in the past, and so I'd like for that to either be placed on our future agenda item, discussion on how we can better support these businesses, or for that to be placed on for our local committees to investigate how better we can support these businesses, especially during moments of crisis and public safety, where it's our job as a city to protect them. And if we don't do that, then they shouldn't have to foot the bill.
Well, can you narrow your ask? Because you said a lot of things there, and I'm interested in part of it, but a lot of things were said, so maybe you could narrow it for us.
For us to take a look at what we can do to support businesses like the bank club during these moments of crisis. And that could look like a lot of things, but since it's just a future agenda item request, I won't go into it.
I'm willing to support referring to the EDAC discussion item for how to support minority serving businesses. Is there support for that? Is that fine with you? Okay, so there's majority support with reference to the EDAC of a request for how to support minority serving businesses. Any other future requests? Okay, the time, yes?
Just the Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay, the time is 8:33, Madam Clerk. We're adjourned. You can go ahead and do your thing.
All right. So, so I'll do the Pledge of Allegiance in the hopes that a future agenda item can be placed for the Pledge of Allegiance to be discussed as to its return to City Hall proceedings.
Recording stopped.